The Strange Death of Europe, a book review. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about a book that has shaped world politics in surprising ways. The book is called The Strange Death of Europe, by British writer Douglas Murray. It was published in 2017, but it feels more relevant today than ever. Some people even say it reads like a policy guide for today's American government. Why would anyone say that? Let's start with two shocking events from 2025. The first happened at the Munich Security Conference in February. This conference is usually a warm meeting of friendly Western allies. But that year, the American vice president gave a very different kind of speech. He told European leaders that their biggest threat was not Russia or China. Instead, he said, the real danger came from inside Europe itself. He accused them of weakening their own culture through mass immigration. The room went completely silent, and many leaders looked shocked. The second event came at the end of the same year. The United States published a new national security strategy report. In this report, Europe was no longer treated as America's top partner. It was ranked behind the Western Hemisphere and the Indo-Pacific region. The report even asked whether some European countries still counted as true allies. Where did these ideas come from? Many trace them back to Murray's book. So today, let's walk through this controversial book together. Before we begin, I need to give you an honest warning. This book takes a strongly conservative position, and many people find it offensive. Critics call it xenophobic, and its claims are hotly debated. You do not have to agree with it, and you may strongly reject it. But these ideas now influence real decisions, so understanding them is still useful. Knowing an argument well is not the same as accepting it. Alright, let's look at Murray's central claim. On the very first page, he writes that Europe is destroying itself. In his view, this is not caused by war or economic failure. It comes from two forces working together at the same time. The first force is physical, large-scale immigration that changed Europe's population very quickly. The second force is spiritual, Europe losing faith in its own culture and history. Murray uses a famous philosophical puzzle called the Ship of Theseus. Imagine an old wooden ship whose planks are replaced one by one. When every plank has been changed, is it still the same ship? Now apply this question to a country instead of a ship. If a nation's population changes completely, is it still the same nation? Murray believes the answer is no, and this idea drives the whole book. So how did this huge change begin? The story starts after World War II. Europe was in ruins, and there were not enough workers to rebuild it. Governments came up with what seemed like a clever temporary solution. They invited foreign workers to come and fill the empty jobs. Britain looked to its former colonies, like India, Pakistan, and the Caribbean. Germany invited workers from Turkey and called them guest workers. The plan assumed these guests would finish the work and then go home. Murray says this was the great mistake of Europe's post-war leaders. They thought they were importing labor, but they were actually importing people. People have families, feelings, and dreams. They are not temporary tools. Naturally, many workers stayed, and they brought their families to join them. That was a completely human and understandable choice. But European governments had no plan for this new reality. After the war, nobody dared to talk about sending people home. Anyone who suggested it risked being compared to the Nazis. So instead, governments kept inventing new reasons why immigration was necessary. First they said there was a labor shortage. Later they said new workers were needed to pay for pensions. Finally, they simply declared that diversity itself was always a good thing. Meanwhile, the numbers grew from thousands to hundreds of thousands each year. Then came the turning point, the refugee crisis of 2015. War in Syria pushed millions of people toward Europe's borders. German Chancellor Merkel opened the doors, and over 1 million people arrived quickly. Murray traveled to the front lines of this crisis to see it himself. He visited Lampedusa, a tiny Italian island close to the North African coast. Boats full of migrants landed there almost every day. Murray noticed that most of the arrivals were young, healthy men. He describes rescue ships that worked almost like a ferry service. In his view, this was no longer refuge, it was relocation. To support his argument, Murray points to some striking statistics. In the 2011 census, white British people were already a minority in London. They made up less than 45% of the capital's population. In Sweden, one story became especially famous. Sweden gave special protection to refugees who arrived as children without parents. Thousands of applicants claimed to be 16 years old. For years, officials were afraid to check, fearing accusations of racism. In 2017, medical tests were finally done on about 8,000 cases. The results showed that more than 80% were actually adults. Grown men had been sitting in classrooms next to real children. For Murray, this showed how fear of criticism can defeat common sense. Now, a fair listener might push back at this point. Haven't Europeans always been a mix of migrants throughout history? And if newcomers adopt European values, does the change really matter? Murray's darkest claim is that this integration mostly never happened. He argues that some neighborhoods now follow their own separate rules. Instead of newcomers becoming European, parts of Europe became like somewhere else. He writes that Europe has become anywhere in the world except itself. This brings us to the second, deeper part of the book. Why didn't ordinary Europeans push back against these changes? Murray's answer is a condition he calls existential fatigue. It means a tiredness of the soul, not of the body. Europe, he says, feels that its story has already been told. This old continent created Christianity, the Enlightenment, and modern science. It also produced colonialism, 2 world wars, and terrible totalitarian systems. After all that history, many Europeans feel only exhaustion and guilt. Murray calls this guilt a kind of moral illness. European schools teach history mainly as a list of crimes. Self-reflection is healthy, he admits, but it has gone too far. Other nations, he notes, feel little shame about their violent pasts. Only Europe, he argues, has turned guilt into its core identity. He tells one shocking story from Norway to make his point. A young politician was violently attacked by a refugee in his own home. The attacker was caught, sentenced, and ordered to leave the country. But the victim said he felt guilty, not relieved. He worried about the difficult future waiting for his attacker back home. For Murray, this is compassion twisted into something self-destructive. He also connects this guilt to Germany's welcome of refugees in 2015. In his reading, it was partly an act of national atonement. By helping refugees today, Germany hoped to wash away its past. Alongside guilt, Murray sees a second problem, an empty spiritual life. Religion has faded, and many churches have become museums or bars. National pride is treated with deep suspicion because of past horrors. What remains are vague universal values that everyone accepts but nobody can define. Murray asks a sharp question about tolerance. If we tolerate everything, should we also tolerate intolerance? He believes Europe has no confident answer to this question. The third part of the book is about silence and cover-ups. When problems appeared, Murray says, officials often hid them instead of solving them. The most painful example comes from Rotherham, a town in northern England. Over 16 years, at least 1,400 young girls were abused there. Most of the criminals came from one particular immigrant community. Police and social workers knew, but they stayed silent for years. An official inquiry found they were afraid of being called racist. Murray's judgment is bitter. An ideology was protected while children were not. A similar pattern appeared in Cologne, Germany, on New Year's Eve 2015. Hundreds of women were attacked and robbed in the main square. For days, the national media said almost nothing about it. The truth only came out because of videos on social media. Murray also criticizes what he calls enforced numbness. After the Manchester concert bombing in 2017, many children were killed. Instead of anger, the public response was singing and candles. Murray asks, why is nobody allowed to be angry? In his view, societies were being trained to accept the unacceptable. And what happened to people who spoke up loudly? Murray devotes a whole chapter to these whistleblowers. In the Netherlands, politician Pim Fortuyn criticized immigration to defend liberal values. He was gay, left-leaning, and definitely not a typical extremist. In 2002, shortly before an election, he was shot dead. Filmmaker Theo van Gogh was murdered after making a film about Muslim women. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a refugee who became a politician, was forced into exile. Murray's conclusion is grim: in Europe, honest prophets are punished. So what does he predict for the future? He does not expect a dramatic awakening or a sudden rescue. Most likely, he says, leaders will simply continue down the same road. Admitting mistakes would mean admitting their whole careers were wrong. By mid-century, he imagines Europe as a giant international transit hub. A place with food and languages from everywhere, but no feeling of home. This slow fading is what he means by a strange death. Now we can finally answer our opening question about America and Europe. American conservatives read this book and drew a cold conclusion. Why defend a civilization that seems unwilling to defend itself? For them, the split is not about money or weapons. It is about something deeper: the will to survive. Murray ends his book with a question worth remembering. What does a civilization truly need in order to last? Not just armies, wealth, or laws, he says, but a story. A people must be able to say who they are and why they matter. If a nation cannot tell that story, no amount of power can save it. Whether you agree with Murray or not, that question deserves serious thought. Remember, this is only one perspective, and strong counterarguments exist. Reading views we dislike can still sharpen our own thinking. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. See you next time with another book.
接下来，我们来复习这部影片的重点单字与片语，每个单字会重复念几次，请跟着一起念。
Controversial. 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 So today, let's walk through this controversial book together. Controversial. Controversial. Trace back to. Trace back to. Trace back to. Where did these ideas come from? Many trace them back to Murray's book. Trace back to. Trace back to. Push back. Push back. Push back. Why didn't ordinary Europeans push back against these changes? Push back. Push back. Integration. 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 Murray's darkest claim is that this integration mostly never happened. Integration. Integration. Cover up. Cover up. Cover up. The third part of the book is about silence and cover-ups. Cover up. Cover up. Whistleblower. 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 Murray devotes a whole chapter to these whistleblowers. Whistleblower. Whistleblower. Atonement. 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 In his reading, it was partly an act of national atonement. Atonement. Atonement.